Hello, and welcome to another season of the Storied Arcs podcast. I am your co-host, Mike.
And I'm your co-host, Alex.
And as is our custom, we will be beginning a new series today with our 0 episode. We call them creator spotlights, we call them introductions. We have a lot of words for them. But the basic concept here is we're going to give a spoiler-free pitch to get you interested in reading this next book with us. And that book will be everything. It's very hard not to make puns with the title of this book because
it might get confusing unintentionally.
Right. I was like, today we're going to talk about everything with no spoilers.
Yes. Yeah. It's
but the
a
book leans into
search
that too. Yeah,
it does, but it's a difficult search. You can't just search everything, obviously. Yeah,
right. It always has to be
comic book.
Yeah, everything comic, everything, and even everything comic is not quite enough. I found that I had to have Cantwell's name attached to it.
You can obviously
everything
you can do
Cantwell.
everything comic Cantwell, everything Dark Horse, comic Dark Horse, something like that. So yeah, this is a SEO is tough on this one, not gonna lie.
Yeah.
But it's by calling it everything. But it is from Dark Horse Comics. It came out on the Burger Books imprint, which if you go back, I have no idea how long at this point, but when we talked about the
like
Seeds
24 months. Yeah.
Almost. I was maybe 2 years. We talked about the Seeds, by the book by I.N.J and David Aha, which is on the Burger Books imprint, which is run by Karen Berger, who was the legendary one of the legendary editors over that co-founded Vertigo back in the day at DC. So if you want more information on that and her deal and kind of what her name means in the larger comic industry and kind of history, if you don't know what that is, run back and listen to that 0 episode for the Seeds. So yeah, but kind of as you mentioned there, and as we go kind of with this look at Burger Books as an idea again, her name carries a certain weight to it, that if she's put her stamp on it, the way she did at Vertigo now, very much more explicitly, that her name is on the imprint. But if she signed off on something, there's a sense and understanding that this is, I was going to say important, that's not the right word, that there's a level of quality.
It means a certain standard. Yeah. And this is the second time she's stamped a Cantwell project, because She Could Fly was also Burger Books. And that came first, didn't it? Which
was Cantwell's first. Yeah, we'll get to that. That's his first comic work. Now, Cantwell was a name that came in, when we talk about kind of his resume and his CV coming in, he's a name that came from outside of comics initially. But yeah, just the idea that this is that Dark Horse would set up an imprint for Karen Berger and kind of, I'm assuming, give her mostly free reign to publish and edit and curate a line of books that with creators that she deems are worthwhile. I think that says something. Everything is it is another one of these I guess we'll call them like COVID books that we've done a little bit of. We've done a handful of, which I think kind of in a roundabout way makes sense for what you and I try to do with this show. Is we want to highlight creator-owned indie published comics that maybe people have or have not read. And a lot of books that came out in like 2018, 2019, and that theoretically would have continued through 2020 and 2021, but then didn't because of all the shutdowns
or they had to change their format or something.
Exactly.
All kinds of stuff.
And so a book that started and maybe had a little buzz, and then that buzz completely dies when the book goes away for a year and a half. And so when a follow-up is issued, like, no one's paying attention anymore, and that happened here with this book, with everything volumes. So there are 2 volumes we're going to talk about. It's 10 issues worth of material. Issues 1 through 5 came out in single issue, starting in September 2019 through January 2020, which again, that's an ominous month and year to stop. Then volume 1 comes out in June 2020, which, that 6-ish months there, it's a little long. Normally you would think that the next issues would start coming out maybe a month or so after, you take a break after the arc. Volume 2 comes out in May 2021. So year and a half after issue 5, the last single issue comes out, volume 2 comes out, and that collects what amounts to issue 6 to 10. I think even on the Dark Horse website it says collects issue 6 through 10, but 6 through 10 were never released in single issue. You can't find them. They don't exist anywhere. It only came out in the the trade format. So much like we just talked about a month or so ago with Crowded, and when we talked about, if you go back with the Seeds, there is a question, I think, here of obviously the intent here was to release single issues, and who knows how long the book would have gone on. Maybe it wasn't supposed to be 10 issues. Maybe they had plans for more and things got adjusted, but it seems like they still approached the story with the idea of, we're going to do 5 more issues.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Whether or not they come out in single issue, they at least had a plan for that. And then I guess it probably, they had to shelve all that, because I do think at the very least issue 6 was solicited. If we're going stretching the memory back here, but because I was reading this single issue, I think issue 6 and maybe even issue 7 were solicited, because comic solicitations come out at minimum 3 months before the release. That's just how the industry works. So it had been out there. Issue 6 had been out there, and I think issue 7 as well, implying that they would have come out sometime in early 2020, and that just never happened. Eventually, they went into the coming out like, infinity TBA, and then they were dropped entirely. And then at some point, volume 2 of everything comes out, and then that's the end of the story. And I, as someone who read this in single issue and was looking forward to the story continuing, and then was blindsided when volume 2 finally came out. It was like, oh, hey, it came out. How about that? Fantastic.
Can I ask you, did you dump your single issues? Did you lose faith in the series ever coming back?
You know what? I did at some point. I think I held on.
I'm the benefactor of that. Yeah. Here's the crazy thing. I have issue 1 signed by Christopher Cantwell, and I bought it for $1.50 in a used bin at Half Price Books, because I think someone was like, well, what's the point in owning this? The series is never coming back, and dumped it. I'm like, what? He still met him and signed it signed. Like, I just don't understand people there, but they're very fickle comic readers.
Yeah. Well, so it was, I picked it up again. I picked up volume 1 again digitally when volume 2 came out, because that's how I picked up volume 2. But it wasn't, I mean, again, I listed the publication. It was May 2021. I don't think I read it. I probably read it 5-6 months after that, later in the year, because I didn't see the solicitation. There was no, whatever announcement there was. Like this book had fallen off my radar, like so many books that got interrupted by COVID and all the shutdowns and the delays in publishing. So it wasn't something that was it was like oh, hey, I remember that book. Wait, do I remember that book? So I had to reread volume 1, and then I read volume 2. So it was like, I remember the basic premise, but some of the ideas of it, like it had completely left my brain.
And so since we're talking about the rereadability of it, it's like one of the fastest reads.
It's very quick.
I mean, we'll get into this a little bit when we get into the pitch. If I'm saying it,
that doesn't mean a whole lot, but if you're saying it,
right.
It means
I'm a quick reader, but I'm finicky about pacing, which I think has been well documented on this podcast. But I sat down to read this, and the first 3 issues took me about the same amount of time that like most weekly or monthly single issue things take. Yeah. But the problem is with this book, at the end of issue 3, you're still just like, is this just random collections of like little vignettes and portrayals of people's life? I mean, I felt like the first 2 or 3 issues felt like an oversized first issue. Yeah. And I was like, oh my gosh, in single issue, would I have made it to month 4 still having no idea who's the main character, what's the plot?
You probably wouldn't have. And I think that's something we'll get into.
Yeah.
I think specifically next week, we can tease it here. It's something that I definitely have thought of as I've gone back and reread it now to discuss it here. Because of how the book ended up being published and finalized, I think retroactively there is a pacing issue early on, in that it felt like they were probably setting up more things they wanted to do and then didn't get to do them because of how the book ended up being published. Again, we'll get to that. We'll get to that next week when we actually get into the story. But we probably should talk about what the book is about, right?
Well, I mean, it's
we should
about
probably
everything.
mention that.
But yeah,
it is everything. Yeah.
All of this to say, if you find yourself in my position and you say, well, Story Dark's doing it, I'll pick it up, and you get 2-3 issues and you're like, I have no idea what's happening. It's just random 2 or 3 page vignettes of things. Hang with it, because clarity does emerge pretty quickly
by the end of
when
volume
it does
one.
show up.
Yes. Yeah. By the end of volume 1, it does. So, actually, before we do
So
that, we should
here's
probably
the-
mention. We should probably mention who did the book, right? I mean, we've alluded
Well,
to the name.
we scramble the order sometimes. So
We do. But the
we'll
book
talk
is written
about
by
the synopsis and things last.
Yeah.
That's our pitch.
The book is written by Christopher Cantwell, who is a name you may know if you're a Marvel reader of note. Last handful of years,
TV watcher,
or for a TV watcher. Yeah, he came from television. When we get into a little more about him, he's associated with *Halt and Catch Fire*. He was one of the co-creators and co-showrunners of that show, which is on AMC. So he is the writer. This is still relatively early in his comic book writing career. He only really started in 20. His first published work was in 2018. This book comes out a year later, starts in 2019. The artist is I.N.J. Culbard. I guess he's credited as I.N.J. Hubbard. I think his name is Ian. He's a British artist, colorist. He does everything, all the interior work. And the letterer is Steve Wands. We're not going to talk about Steve Wands here. We talked about him. If you go back very, very early on for the is it Underwater Welder?
Probably. Yeah.
Underwater
whatever
Welder,
the first Lemire was.
Which is the book when we talked about the first time we talked about Jeff Lemire. Steve Wands is a letterer. He does a lot of stuff, but more specifically, he letters everything that Jeff Lemire does. So he doesn't only do Jeff Lemire work, but we talked about him. We talked about the works of Lemire and Underwater Welder. So we'll get into kind of a little bit of what Cantwell and Culbard have done in their careers. As I mentioned, so real quick, very, very, very important. If you're going to search Christopher Cantwell, search Christopher Cantwell writer.
Yes. Especially on Wikipedia.
What you don't want to search is Christopher Cantwell neo-Nazi activist. Don't search that, because that is a thing, and you don't want to give clicks to whatever page that's going to.
Yeah.
So
plus
you
that's the trending search right now anyway. So you really want to steer clear of it.
That one's probably coming up first right now as you record this. So Christopher Cantwell writer, or like TV whatever it is, that's where you want to go. Very, very important. As you mentioned, he's probably best known for *Halt and Catch Fire*. He co-created, co-showran, co-wrote, co-directed that series with Christopher C. Rogers. Did you watch *Halt and Catch Fire*?
I never finished it, but I did enjoy what I watched.
Same.
I think I caught up in real time, and then I lost track of it, much like this book.
Yeah, I watched the first season, which my understanding that is the weakest season. So *Halt and Catch Fire* was a show that it was an AMC show that it talked about the rise of the personal computer and kind of early days of the internet.
It's kind of a fictionalized it is to like the Jobs Gates controversy what the Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay are to the rise of DC and Marvel.
That's actually pretty good there. But I am told that, because people who watch this show, like anyone who's watched this show all the way through, like evangelizes for it. At least people that I know, people whose taste I trust, they love this show. And I think particularly as it came towards the end, like it's really, really good. That's what everyone has told me, that the first season is probably the weakest. And that's the one that I saw. And I enjoyed it, but it wasn't sticky enough for me. And then again, as the show goes on, people whose opinions I trust were like, this show rules. And so it's something I'll probably get back to at some point, just because enough people have said it's good and worth the watch. But that's, again, probably what Cantwell's name is most known for. That I want to say the last season of *Halt and Catch Fire* was in 2017, I think, 2016, 2017. And not that he stopped doing television work. I think most notably him and Christopher Rogers, they were credited exec producers and writers on the Paper Girls adaptation that was on Amazon. from a few years back. So
Yeah. Oh,
they were brought on as part of that, and so I think they've been brought on and to work and work on and exec produce kind of other shows and things. But in terms of like things that they've created that have been a hit, I think *Halt and Catch Fire* is kind of really the thing, their only thing that they've really done, because right after that is when he starts publishing comic books. You mentioned *She Could Fly*, which was his first book, his first published comic book. That was at Dark Horse Burger Books again. He did that with Martin Morazzo, name we mentioned last month. If you listen to our Death Month theme, Morazzo has done a lot of work with W. Maxwell Prince, like on Ice Cream Man, and he always contributes to any of his anthology storybooks, like the one we talked about, Swan Songs. So he started the first volume of *She Could Fly* in 2018. I think it's had 3 different volumes. And again, I believe the first 2 volumes were single issue, and then it straddled COVID, and I think volume 3 came out as a full collection. So again, anyone working in this time, it's another one of those books that kind of, because it straddled that time frame, could get a little lost. And then again, I don't know how much they planned to go, if that was supposed to go a lot longer, but it ended up being 3 volumes of *She Could Fly*.
yeah. Strange production on that one.
Yeah.
Strangely, I got very excited about *She Could Fly* when it first came out. I found the first few issues like a little underwhelming, which I think might just be a Cantwell thing. In my experience, he's a TV guy, right? Like, and TV in this era ramps up as it goes. It finds its footing as it works itself out, rather than like being this tight ship in a bottle type thing. And I would say the same for. I read his Iron Man run, and I enjoyed it. I'm not the biggest Iron Man. I mean, I guess I'm probably bigger than the average for Iron Man reading, just because I always check in on every new Iron Man series, which I think is more than most comic readers would do. But I thought it was a really solid run, like 25 issues or something on Iron Man.
It was about 2 years. Yeah.
And other people have said like, oh my gosh, like the Chris Cantwell run on Iron Man was like just incredible, because he knows how to write some like good twists, good hooks. And it's one thing to do it with your own material. It's another thing to say, here's Tony Stark stranded on another planet. He has a spinal cord injury, and the only thing holding his head in place is the suit. So now he has to keep the suit on indefinitely. It's like, okay, you can write 10 more issues with that hook. Like, that's a really easy thing. But he introduces that in like, I don't know, issue 8 or 9. And before that, it's kind of like floundering. And then it's like, well, we have to build this team. And then there's this cosmic Iron Man thing. So like he goes to great heights and great places. And I believe he has it all in mind from conception. He just kind of lets things snowball. I think that's his technique. And I think that's certainly true in everything. By the time you realize what the book, like what's happening in the book, you see the value of everything that came before it.
Yeah, and I think,
so it's a little bit of a big ask for readers.
There is I think that's a good comp about the idea of him having that television background, and maybe because a book like *She Could Fly* and everything were earlier in his comic career, before he started really writing. I guess the for hire stuff, which again, you're right, it is different. It's different when you come in and write and take over an Iron Man title. Or work on any sort of pre-existing property where you can jump right in, and all you have to worry about is your take, because the character's established, the world's established. All you got to do is start with your story versus having to establish the entire ecosystem of what your story is, like when it's a creator and book. So maybe that's was an early on kind of thing. It often happens when notable or celebrated quote unquote outside comics people come into comics. Their early work tends to be good, but you can tell they're still new to how the rhythms of comics work. Like they're not used to writing those types of scripts. I always think about when Ta-Nehisi Coates came into comics.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
He started with Black Panther. Was like, this is really good. It's really interesting, but it's really overwritten. And then a year or so later, when he takes over Captain America #1, and you see how lean that is and how
Yeah.
much he now understands better letting the artist tell things. And it's like, oh, he's leveled up. He's learned now. So when you read those early Black Panther, it's just the ideas are there, the story is there, but it's like really overwritten. And I think some of that is just the getting familiar. Even though you can be a fan of comics your whole life, someone like Coates is, who's read hundred thousands of comics. When you're actually sitting down to write those scripts and put those ideas onto page to go into panels with art, it can be tougher to do. And I think maybe you see some of that with Cantwell's work as well, that those earlier creator owned stuff, pacing wise, you get some issues that you don't get later. But he has a handful of a kind of, Marvelous is the stuff he's done most in terms of for hire work. We mentioned that Iron Man run. He spent 2 years on that. He had a little run on, I guess it was like a maxi series of Doctor Doom. I think it was like 10 or 12 issues, which was Eisner nominated. That was right before he did Iron Man. He did some Star Wars work, did an Obi-Wan book. He did a Patsy Walker Hellcat series, which spun out of his Iron Man book. So it's like he set things up in his Iron Man run, which led to some other things. He did a little Gold Goblin, which was tied into the previous Spider-Man run, where Norman Osborn had actually been like the 90th or 105th time where he's turned good and is actually a hero now, but he was still dealing with the Goblin thing, and so he was the Gold Goblin. He was a hero there. That was a little mini series that tied in. So he's done a lot of mostly Marvel stuff, a real handful of DC stuff. Like a lot of creators, because he's a name. He's Christopher Cantwell from TV's *Halt and Catch Fire*. He's a name you can put on to like a short story, to be in an anthology book and things like that. So he's done stuff like that. He has two notable DC works. One was Plastic Man No More with Alex Linz, which is kind of like this body horror Plastic Man book, which I think if you're kind of a horror fan, people really liked, because it was a horror book that was kind of within regular DC superhero stuff. And he just started a book with Sean Izaki. It's a new volume of Challengers in the Unknown. Challengers are kind of an old school DC team that were kind of like the science fiction team back in the day.
Wasn't that what they referenced in the Teen Titans Go movie? There was like an obscure reference to Challengers of the Unknown.
I think so. Yeah. So that's what Challengers had been. As we're recording this right now, DC is in what they're calling like their all-in initiative, and they've just revamped the entire idea of the Justice League, where basically every hero is a Justice League member now. And so they have the Watchtower, which is their giant satellite base in space, and what they've done with the Challengers is the Challengers team, they run the Watchtower. They run the day-to-day operations, like keep it up and running. So they aren't doing the hero work. They're doing like the maintenance for the Watchtower. And so it ties into everything that DC's doing with what their superheroes are. And so Cantwell is writing the book about that, the people that run the Watchtower, because there's some stuff going on in the background like there always is, even though they're not the ones going down to Earth or out in space doing the hero work. There's still something going on in the Watchtower. They're making sure it's up and running so the heroes can do their work. He's doing that right now, and that is, as we're recording this episode, that is just started as kind of part of this new current DC initiative. Outside of that, he's got a bunch of kind of random work at a lot of different publishers. Also at Dark Horse, where he has his creator-owned stuff, his She Could Fly and everything. He did a Mask book, as in Mask, like the Jim Carrey movie Mask.
Oh, sure.
Obviously started as a comic beforehand, but he did a comic in that IP space. Over at IDW, I know he has done some Star Trek work in the IDW Star Trek canon, which I believe is actual Star Trek canon in terms of the stories that they've told at the various levels. I think it's all part.
It's big. All part of it's got canon. A following,
yeah.
And yeah,
it does. But I'm saying I don't think it's a separate canon. I do believe it is part of the Star Trek canon, from original series to Next Gen to DS9, to all of that. I think it is all one story there. He has done some work in there, specifically a miniseries called Defiant. So yeah, that's one of those IPs that yeah, the fans of it, they absolutely love it. Star Trek fans, that is where, although I guess Star Trek right now is having a bit of a resurgence, like the various shows on Paramount Plus, whether they're animated or whatnot. There had been kind of a dearth of new Star Trek stuff, kind of in the wake of the newest movies, just kind of after that. But Trek fans have like they're eating pretty well right now, whether it's the comics or TV shows. So he's contributed to that. He had a book over
Can
at
I be honest with
Boom.
you? I never feel bad for Trek fans just because they already have such a huge canon of high quality stuff.
There's a library.
That it's like, oh, you went through a 3-year lull. Like, you know what? I haven't enjoyed a Star Wars movie in the theater since they re-released Empire Strikes Back in elementary school for me.
Well, see, that's your problem because Last Jedi is great. It got thrown away with Rise of Skywalker, which is arguably one of the worst ever done, but we're not getting into that now. Back to Cantwell stuff there. He did a really cool book over at Boom, and it may be still ongoing. I'm not quite certain. I only read the first couple issues. This book at Boom with, I'm going to assume it's called, his name is pronounced German Garcia. It's called Briar. It is a reinterpretation, reimagining, whatever you want to call it, of the Sleeping Beauty story. Sleeping Beauty, aka Princess Aurora, aka Briar Rose, basically where she saves herself, and it's kind of a fantasy swords and sandals.
It's a very cool book. Yeah,
it's a cool book. Either it's still ongoing or it's had multiple different subtitled volumes. I'm not quite certain, but I read the first volume of that, and at least what I thought was the first volume. It's a very cool book. Overall, so at Boom, he's done a little work in the Buffyverse. I think he did an Angel book, and then a really cool book that I enjoyed called Regarding the Matter of Oswald's Body.
Yeah,
he did that with artist Luca Casalanguida, which is like this crime thriller historical mystery novel about what happened to.
Can I tell you
Oswald's
that
body.
I heard the title of it and I saw the cover. I didn't even know who the creative team was, and I was like, pull it. I was like, I'm just all up for like conspiracy.
Had you read
espionage.
anything like Cantwell prior? Like, had you read? Cause I know you. I think in general,
believe
like,
I had, but I didn't
more than
even. I didn't like. I added it to my cart before I saw it was Cantwell. I was just like, this is so up my alley. The premise, the art, it just looks so cool. It's kind of what I wanted Department of Truth to be. Granted, I love Department of Truth, but it's not what I thought it was.
Department of Truth, it takes this is a much more straightforward approach to this kind of historical fiction. Department of Truth, which is the James Tynion, the fourth book with Martin Simmons, that's a much more abstract, wilder kind of supernatural aspect. But yeah, this book is very, very cool. And I think what I like about and I'll mention two more things. He has some books over at Vault. One is called The Blue Flame with Adam Gorham, the artist. That's kind of a superhero identity crisis, like personal identity crisis story. And he has a new book that's coming out that, as you are listening to this episode, would have just come out the week prior. It's a book called Kid Maroon. That is with artist Victor Santos. It is a hard-boiled detective story, except the detective is a kid. Like, what I think what I highlight here is the number of different genres we've just touched on. So, he obviously has superhero work, straightforward superhero stuff. He can do his own superhero book, like I just mentioned with The Blue Flame. His creator-owned work, the two books, the two books on Burger Books here, She Could Fly and everything, are effectively based in the real world. They have some other things going on there, potentially some fantastical, magical realism elements to it, but they're basically, set in our world. He has IP stuff, like I mentioned, the Buffyverse, that Angel book that's in the Buffyverse. There's Star Trek. He can go fairy tale fantasy with Briar. He can have this historical detective crime fiction story. This Kid Maroon is that story. The regarding the matter of Oswald's body has this historical aspect, detective thriller aspect to it. We just have all these different genres that he seems to be relatively comfortable working in. So it's almost like he can't be pegged down.
That's true. Although I think
one genre, which I think is pretty cool.
Well, I definitely think that's cool. That's what I'd love to see from a writer is that kind of versatility. But he's also not a total chameleon. Like he's got his spin on everything. Like and like so if you look at the Dark Horse Burger Books website for the book Everything, and it says genre horror, I think that's a little reductive and misleading. It's reductive, I think, is because it's like there are horror elements to it.
100%.
And I think there's always
but this book would not be listed in a horror section alone. Like you wouldn't put
if you did, it would be an egregious mistake because horror readers would be pissed. Like people who want actual straight up horror would be like, this like dips its toe in the pool of horror.
This is much more mystery, almost not quite thriller, but yeah.
I think it's much more thriller than horror, even though it's not real actiony like a thriller.
Yeah,
but all of that to say, that little like horror lens that like just puts a little horror spin on the elements of the story, I do think is a Cantwell. Is Halt and Catch Fire the one where you learn at the end of the first episode that the main character has just given this like kind of like sob story, like this is why this is important to me, and then you find out that it's all a lie, and you see that he got some like scars on his body or something. It's like that's just that to me is the Cantwell lens, where it's like, there's like a facade to things.
I think I don't think I would have pegged the horror aspect, kind of the horror tinge to it. What I think the through line that I see through the stuff that I've read is that there's always some sort of mystery. It's not like there's something. Yeah, he's holding something back. It isn't like the J.J. Abrams mystery box thing, but there's something beneath the surface. There's another level there that either the reader or the characters have to figure. There's some sort of mystery that has to be figured out or solved or dealt with. And I think a lot of that does end up being maybe some sort of horror. It could be body horror. It could be psychological, whatever it is there. But there's a lot of the things, there's always some sort of mystery, something that has to be figured out. He likes to imbue that in his comic work. I think that's the through line that I see through a lot of his stuff. Although I will say I've read most of his independent stuff, his indie stuff there. I have not read a lot of his DC, his Marvel stuff, his main stuff, because you mentioned, you read more Iron Man than probably the average. You more than I do. Iron Man has never been a character that I've cared about or read, like ever. I only read Iron Man when he shows up or crosses over into a book that I'm already reading.
Well, and I came by it in a very roundabout way. Basically, I had a lot of comic friends who were geeking out at the trailer of Iron Man 2 because they were like, it's Demon in a Bottle, it's Demon in a Bottle, it's Demon in a Bottle.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, okay. So I went and read Demon in a Bottle, and I was like, all right, that was pretty great. And then I started like sifting through bad Iron Man comics, which like,
well, because we got to remember,
they're not the worst, but there's just decades of mediocrity.
Well, because we got to remember, going into the first Iron Man movie in 2018, like Iron Man was like a D-list character.
Right. He was not getting the A-list writers and artists.
Yeah, like he was not an important character, which is why he was one of the ones that was left after Marvel sold off the rights to the ones that did matter. Spider-Man, the X-Men, the Fantastic Four. Like, he was one of the ones that was left. So yeah, I imagine there's been which is one of the reasons why, like, I never read him, because he was never important. And then because of the MCU and Marvel Studios, in the last 15 some odd years, Tony Stark has become one of the most important characters in the Marvel Comics universe, in the 616 universe, in that little bit of synergy there. So yeah, I never read him. So yeah, now he gets the big name writers. I didn't read his Doctor Doom little mini maxi series there, partially because I've also never been a big Fantastic Four person. So like he's writing properties that I never really engaged with. Now I did read his Gold Goblin book because that tied into kind of what was going on with Amazing Spider-Man at the time. But yeah, a lot of the stuff that he's just specifically worked on at Marvel is like the corners of the Marvel universe that I don't read.
Right.
So yeah, I don't have much experience with Cantwell's work as a for hire writer at the big two. But I have read a decent chunk of his independent comics,
Well, and
which is
as we
unusual for
talk
me.
about both his experience in TV and genre crossing, all this other stuff, and then you see that he was the EP for the Paper Girls TV show. It's like, oh, nothing makes more sense because it's a great indie comic.
Yeah.
It is a limited thing. It was beautifully adapted to television. Just one of those things, they gave up the ghost on it before they got the shiny new IP of Lord of the Rings while developing Paper Girls season 1. And I think they were just like, all right, well, all the money's going into this Lord of the Rings property now.
Well, and I think also there's this idea of then, oh, so we have a guy here that has created, run, and written his own television show, and someone that has also been writing and publishing comics who's still doing the television stuff. So it's like, well, we can get a steady hand in here maybe for someone on the television side,
Right.
but someone that also understands the medium we're coming from. So it made a lot of sense that the team of Cantwell and Rogers would be brought in to helm or be a part of the exec produced team for a show like. So yeah, that's Cantwell's stuff. He's only had, as we just cross into 2025 here, he's only had effectively 6+ years of working as a professional comic writer, which seems to be most of his output now. If you look at like his IMDb stuff, I'm sure he still pursues and works on television and movie properties. But his time seems to mostly be spent towards working on comics. As I said, Marvel keeps him pretty busy, and the fact that he just started this new Challenge of the Unknown series over at DC, maybe that means he'll start doing some more stuff on the other side of the street as well as continuing with his own work. Which I would love to see. And I'm personally, I would love to see more stuff like the Oswald's Body book. Something
Right.
that that's in that little kind of real straight up mystery thriller stuff. It doesn't have to be historical really, but I really enjoyed that book. I would love to see that. Maybe then a little less of the kind of the fantastical stuff, but whatever it is, he's someone that he's now a name that I recognize for his comic work. And when he's billed now, like when you read his Marvel stuff, or I think even like the Challenges book that just started, when they say like from writer Christopher Cantwell, and then there's a parenthetical about the stuff he's worked on or creators worked on, now that parenthetical is all comic stuff. Before it was Christopher Cantwell from
Halt and Catch Fire.
AMC's
Yeah.
Halt and Catch Fire. Yeah. So he is now someone being recognized for his comic work and not just being a TV guy that came over to comics, which that's not always the easiest hill to climb when you're coming in from outside, because even someone like Ta-Nehisi Coates, as much as he's written in comics, he's still known as the MacArthur Genius Grant recipient, the author of Me Against the World and things like that. So
Right.
like it's hard to overcome where you came from if you come from quote unquote outside of comics. So Cantwell is someone that now is recognized for his comic work, which I think is
Yeah. Do we need to talk about? We still need to talk about Ian before we get into the book itself. I mean, there's not that much to say about the book without spoiling, but let's talk about Ian.
We'll talk about the Ian Culbard, or again, he's credited. I think he's credited professionally as I.N.J. Culbard. I mentioned he's a British artist, so a lot of his work, a lot of his early work, is 2000 AD, Judge Dredd, a lot of Doctor Who licensed work, Sherlock Holmes, a lot of like almost like offensively or stereotypically British stuff that he's worked on in terms of graphic novels and things of that nature. He has a ton of work with writer Dan Abnett at a various number of different probably most notably this DC Vertigo book, kind of at the tail endish of the Vertigo era, first Vertigo era, called The Dead Guardians, which was a vampire zombie book he did with Dan Abnett. Um, he has a book over at Dark Horse with Abnett that's called Dark Ages, which I've never read, never heard of, but the solicit is basically Starship Troopers meets Kingdom of Heaven, which I don't know. I guess sounds cool. I don't know. Also at Dark Horse, the book I have read, two books I have read that Culbard has drawn. One is You Look Like Death, which is the spin-off series
Yep.
from the Umbrella Academy, which is he did that with I guess story was done by Gerard Way, who was a co-creator of Umbrella Academy, and Sean Simon. I think Sean Simon then wrote the actual scripts for this. But it's a spin-off for one of the characters, Seance, who is the character that kind of communes with death. That is what his power was from the Umbrella Academy. And he's currently doing a book in the from the world of Minor Threats called The Brood. Minor Threats is a whole superhero book and universe that was co-created, co-conceived by Patton Oswalt and Jordan Blum. They had worked together, I think, on the MODOK animated show, which was on Hulu, which was part of part of the MCU when they were still doing that. But Oswald and Blum have worked together, and they've created this world of Minor Threats. And there's been a couple Minor Threats kind of series, multiple volumes that deal with kind of the main characters there. And then they've had a bunch of, I gotta say, a handful of spin-offs that are done by different creators, different artists, just to work in that world. So it's kind of like, it's very similar to what Jeff Lemire did with Black Hammer, where he kind of shepherded the overall major story, and then you have all these other side stories where he's consulted on with about the story and the character in the world, but then those scripts are done by various writers and artists coming in to contribute a 4-issue miniseries, a 6-issue miniseries, something like that. But they're all in the same world, they're all in the same universe. So he's working on that ongoing, again, with the book called The Brood. The other book that's notable, because it's been going on for so long and had multiple series, I think it's had at least 4 series or volumes. It's another book with Dan Abnett. It's called Wild's End. It's known as War of the Worlds meets Wind in the Willows, which is very true. It's set
Who is his editor? These are incredible pitches.
I don't know, but they're great. I think him and Abnett kind of had that relationship there. But it is about the book is set in like 1930s rural England countryside. All the characters are anthropomorphic animals, and then they are dealing with an alien invasion. So that is the War of the Worlds part and the Wind in the Willows part there. But that's over at Boom. I said it's had multiple volumes. So there's like Wild's End and then Wild's End : something. And then I think another volume, went back to just being called Wild's End. So it's like when a band has multiple self-titled albums. I don't know, but it's been ongoing for a while. And it's been popular enough where it's had multiple volumes, multiple miniseries, things of that nature. But again, it's part of this kind of ongoing partnership that Culbard has with Dan Abnett. And Dan Abnett's a writer who's written for everybody. He's done plenty of for hire license work at Marvel and DC and all that. But it does seem like him and Culbard have a working relationship where they have things that they want to do kind of on their creator-owned side, the indie comic side. So if you see I.N.J. Culbard's name on a book, there's a good chance, and if it's not from one of the big two or anything like that, there's a good chance that it's a book that he did with Dan Abnett. So Wild's End is pretty cool. I do want to check out that Dark Ages book because Starship Troopers meets Kingdom of Heaven seems like a pretty wild elevator pitch.
You have to be such a specific age for Starship Troopers to be a great pitch, but I think we're both in that range.
Yeah. Where like maybe when you start, I don't know about you, I saw Starship Troopers and didn't get it when it first came out.
Well, I mean, I was in elementary school and my friend had it and it was like, oh my gosh, it's a rated R movie. And I think there's like some nudity or a sex scene or something like very briefly in it, which was very exciting for elementary school boys. And like we saw it. And then I think by the time I was in high school, I was like, oh, that's campy, that's bad,
Yeah,
that's embarrassing. And then the bell curve came around, and like
yeah,
20 years
yeah.
later, people are like, oh, Starship Troopers, great nostalgia,
What
fantastic,
satire?
like
It's like
cult
what
classic.
satire? Yeah,
Right.
it's satire now. People understand it's meant to be camp. But yeah, that book sounds interesting. Yeah, I'm into it. I've read a little bit of Wild Zen. I read some of the first series of that. I think the original first series that just called Wild Zen. Which is pretty cool. Culbard style, I think, really works well with the animal aspect, the anthropomorphic animal aspect. I think I have a little quibble sometimes with this human character design. We see it a little bit in we'll talk about it some in everything. I think that's just like personal taste and flavor, you know.
Sure.
But I think his style does really work well when it comes with like if you see Wild's End, I think it looks really, really good. Almost looks like a different style entirely, like different artist entirely. I don't think it's because he's drawing animals as people versus people as people. But again, his style may or may not be for everything, for everybody. But we'll get into that more next week when we actually get into the book. Which I guess at this point, now that we've covered the creative teams, we should talk about what this book is about. What is everything about?
Well, that's a great. So I'm going to read this from Dark Horse, and then I'm going to tell you what I don't like about it. But
Sure.
uh, here's the pitch for Volume One from Dark Horse's website. Everything is a gleaming new mega department store which arrives to extraordinary thrill and rapidly escalates to inexplicable mania in the small town of Holland, Michigan. Who or what exactly is in charge here? What insidious plans are in store? So,
Yeah.
first of all, great wordplay there in store.
Yes.
Um, in addition to all the everything isms of the book, what this synopsis does not convey, which I don't think it necessarily needs to, is that I think there's also a lot of 80s nostalgia in it. Because it is set in the early 80s, is it not?
I think yeah. There is
Because there are like technologies that
don't
characters
exist. Yeah. Yeah.
they don't exist. Characters don't use them or don't rely on them.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would also point out there is the potential flaw that Mike Norton and Tim Seeley told us about of using a real town. Like with
Yeah.
when they wanted to do their rural noir, they were like, yeah, last time we went to our town in
Yeah.
Wisconsin,
Yeah.
they were not big fans of the book.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
the most flattering portrayal of their town.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think, Holland, Michigan doesn't necessarily come off for the worse in this book, other than
No.
to
No.
say it's the small town in mid-America.
Yeah. Well, it's more what it represents here, much like it did in Revival here. I think it's interesting. I think this book has a mix of the 80s nostalgia, but also into late 90s, early aughts understanding of capitalism, because the idea of the megastore, the one-stop shop megastore obviously existed prior to like the aughts and late 90s, but it really took a boom then, right? When a Walmart would come in, when a Target would come in, right? To a town. It was like a big deal and things like that. That obviously existed, that started in the 70s and 80s and all that. But I think that rampant fear, I guess, or some of the mania around it, some of the mania associated with these big stores opening up, is it's a recent past thing. We've seen it more and more where these stores come in, and now we see those like mom and pop stores in the small towns start disappearing and things like that. So
Right.
this book is a commentary on all that. It kind of spans those kind of generations there. While it takes the idea of that kind of ruthless capitalism, and it does. There are some supernatural other elements going on here that we can go ahead and say and lay those groundwork. So when you start reading the book and weird things start happening, that is part of that's part of the DNA of the story. So not something to be confused or put off by. So, but yeah, I think this book has some interesting things to say about what stores like this can and do represent to some people.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is like with the book is it seems like it's going to be a commentary on one thing and then it ends up becoming just the hook.
Yes, yeah,
This is not a small time story about how a Walmart impacts a small town in middle America,
yeah.
even though that's the setting.
It is more of
It's a metaphor.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But
It's more of like what is the evil behind what Walmart is as a general idea, not specifically to this one town. Just like what is the
right.
larger evil of yeah. So
and where are the little cracks of humanity shining through, even in the midst of the big unwieldy corporation, working for nefarious purposes. And I think that's all interesting. Like, there's no bad spin here, but I'm also interested. I'm also the guy who would read the indie book with no sci-fi, no horror, no suspense. That's literally just about a big megastore coming in and ruining a small town in middle America,
and it focuses on the town and
that's about the town and the economics, and it's really sad and bleak. That's right up my alley.
Yeah,
it's not a great elevator pitch to a Burger Books or whomever, but I would read that.
I don't know, that does seem the kind of book that Karen Berger would sign off on. I would read that book as well too. But you are right. That is not what this book is trying to say. That the focus is shifted towards the mega corporation, towards the everything store, and seeing what's going on there. And it just so happens the setting is we're going to put it in this small town, and see what that does to the town. But the focus is less on them. You are right. There is a bit of a Trojan horse there, because the setup obviously is big megastore comes into the small town, and now, whoa, look at the opportunity that brings to the town. Look at the jobs. Look at the economy boost and all that stuff there. And you think, oh, the story is going to be about what this does and how this affects, like I said, the mom and pop shops, the smaller stores, things like that, Main Street USA, whatever that idea is. And it's less about that and more about like, holy cow, is this corporation like literally evil? Not just like seemingly evil because they're rampant capitalists, but are they actually evil? So the story is more about that, and that's where we get to some of the supernatural, fantastical elements to the story. So yeah, I think there's some good stuff there. And I will say, going into it right now, because while I may have dinged I.N.J. Culbard's art on character design and human design, I think the coloring in this book is really, really great. It's really, really cool. And obviously Culbard does all of his stuff. He does all the interior work. So that is definitely something we're going to highlight, and it becomes important in the book as well. I think the way the colors, the contrast that's
the
used
catalog
here, I think really,
pages really cool. Are my favorite thing in the book.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Which
those are a lot of fun. When we get to that, the book, those are really, really fun. Yeah, I can't wait to talk about that.
Excellent. All right. Anything else people need to know other than don't try to track down issues 6 through 10?
Yeah. This is one definitely that easiest to find in trade. You may be able to find those single issues 1 through 5 like you did. It's possible. But really find this book in trade, volume 1 and volume 2. It'll be much easier. Obviously, it'll be the only way you can find volume 2, those issues. But track these books down, 2 volumes. As we mentioned, it's a fairly quick read. So it's something that you can get into and have some thoughts about pretty quickly.
Great. We will see you next Thursday for volume 1, issues 1 through 5. Basically all the single issues, if you happen to have them. Read those and come ready to discuss. There's going to be a lot. There's a lot that's happening. And like I said earlier, if you struggle with some confusion in issues 1 and 2, maybe even into 3, push through. Just keep reading. Like, just keep flipping. It's not dialogue heavy. There's not a lot of heavy substance in the first 3. There's just a lot of what in the world is going on. Just keep going. Don't try to pause and figure it out. Start Googling things. Just keep reading.
Which is why we like to do closed-end series, so we know that even if pacing gets a little weird in the middle of a story, we know there's an end. We're not saying you're going to necessarily like the end or how satisfying the ending is, but know that there is an end. So you'll get to, so whatever determinations you're going to make about how the story plays out and all that, wait until we get to an ending yeah, if you feel a little lost early on, power through and get to it. It'll start to make sense to you to kind of what they're setting up in the story.
Excellent. All right. We will see you next week.
Peace.